As a single mom and her daughter stood in front of the school, the young girl innocently mentioned that she had spent time at Daddy's house while pointing to the building. What first seemed like a child's harmless misunderstanding took a darker turn when the mother discovered that a trusted teacher was behind the nickname. Those innocent words from her daughter would soon become the mother's worst nightmare, shattering her world in an instant. What dark secrets lurked behind her daughter's casual mention of Daddy's house, and what horrifying truth was this mother about to uncover? Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The morning sun peeked through the clouds as Julia Evans navigated her car through the quiet suburban streets. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white with tension she couldn't quite explain. In the rearview mirror, she caught glimpses of her daughter Lily in the back seat, the 10-year-old's gaze fixed out the window as houses and trees blurred past. Julia had been a single mother for 5 years now, ever since that terrible day when her husband Daniel was taken from them far too soon. The wound of his loss still felt raw some days, especially when she looked at Lily and saw echoes of him in her smile or the determined set of her chin. As they approached an intersection, Julia noticed a father and young son crossing the street hand in hand. The man leaned down to ruffle the boy's hair affectionately as they walked. Out of the corner of her eye, Julia saw Lily quickly turn away from the window, a flicker of sadness crossing her face before she could hide it. "You okay back there, sweetie?" Julia asked gently. Lily nodded, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm fine, Mom." But Julia recognized the longing look, having seen it countless times before. Her heart ached, knowing there was a void in Lily's life that she could never fully fill, no matter how hard she tried. As the car began to accelerate again after the intersection, Lily's small voice piped up from the back seat. "Mom, can you tell me about Dad again, about what happened?" Julia's hands tightened imperceptibly on the steering wheel. She had recounted the story of Daniel's death to Lily more times than she could count over the years, sometimes multiple times a week. She was certain Lily knew every detail by heart at this point. And yet, her daughter continued to ask for the story over and over, as if hoping for a different ending each time. "Oh, honey, you know the story," Julia said hesitantly. "I'm not sure this is a good time to get into all that. We're almost at school." Lily glanced at the dashboard clock. "But we're early, Mom. Please, I want to hear it again." Julia sighed softly. As they turned onto the tree-lined street leading to Silverwood Academy, she began the familiar tale once more. "It was a beautiful Sunday afternoon," she started, her voice taking on a practiced cadence. "We had just finished a picnic in the park. You loved chasing butterflies that day, remember? On the drive home, you and I were in the back seat while Dad sat up front with Gary." "Gary was Grandpa's driver," Lily chimed in. Julia nodded. "That's right, he'd been driving for your grandfather since he was young, but Gary was getting older, and his eyesight wasn't what it used to be. He shouldn't have been driving that day." She paused, swallowing hard against the lump forming in her throat. Even after all this time, reliving that moment was difficult. "There was an accident," Julia continued softly. "The car went off the road. You and I were hurt, but the police and ambulance came quickly. They took us to the hospital. But Gary and Dad, they didn't make it." Silence fell in the car as Julia finished the story. She glanced in the rearview mirror to see Lily nodding solemnly, lost in thought. Julia had told this story countless times over the years, always sticking to the facts as gently as she could. In the aftermath of the accident, she had taken Lily to a child psychologist, who specifically warned her that Lily might ask to hear the story repeatedly, sometimes for years, as part of the normal healing process, while her still developing brain and sense of identity evolved. Concealing details or fabricating stories would only leave deeper scars, the psychologist had explained. Children were perceptive. They needed a trusted adult brave enough to tell them the truth so they could believe in themselves and trust that they were capable of accepting the harsh realities. So Julia had committed to always being that trusted adult for Lily, no matter how painful it was to relive the tragedy. But there were moments like now when she felt the weight of being both mother and father, of carrying not just her own grief but Lily's as well. The constant retelling had turned the story into something of a script, the words flowing automatically in a way that almost felt disconnected from the raw emotions of that day. They were financially stable thanks to Daniel's life insurance and the family's other assets. But money couldn't fill the void left by his absence. Julia felt the struggle of single motherhood acutely, seeing Lily's need for a father figure and missing her dad. As she pulled into the parking lot of Silverwood Academy, Julia pushed those heavy thoughts aside. Today was a bright day, and she was determined to focus on the present rather than dwell in the past. Julia and Lily exited the car, the cool morning air nipping at their cheeks as they made their way towards the school entrance. Julia was surprised to find the grounds still quiet and largely empty at this hour. Checking her watch, she saw it was 7:45 a.m. Usually the area would be bustling with activity by now, as students arrived for the 8 a.m. start time. Confused, she turned to Lily. "That's odd. It's 7:45, but there's hardly anyone here. Is there something going on at school today that I forgot about?" Lily gave an exasperated sigh. "Mum, I've been trying to tell you all morning. We're early. School starts late today at 8:30. It's Founders' Day, remember? We only have a half day." Julia felt a pang of guilt. She had been so overwhelmed with work lately that she must have completely missed that information. "Oh, sweetie, I'm so sorry. I've been so distracted this week. Why didn't you mention it earlier?" "I did," Lily said patiently, "and Granny Evelyn knew too." "Ah, well, Granny had her yoga class this morning, so we didn't get a chance to talk," Julia explained. "I'm sorry I wasn't paying better attention." Realizing they now had some time to kill, Julia suggested they find a bench to sit on until more students started arriving. As they settled onto a wooden seat in the courtyard, Lily pulled out her math textbook. "Can you quiz me, Mum?" she asked eagerly. "I have a test today and I want to make sure I'm ready." Julia smiled, touched by her daughter's dedication to her studies. "Of course, honey, let's see what you've got." For the next 15 minutes, Julia posed increasingly complex math problems, watching proudly as Lily solved them with ease in her head. Her daughter had inherited her father's sharp mind and natural aptitude for numbers. It was one of the few silver linings in their situation. Despite Julia's busy schedule, Lily was self-motivated enough to keep up with her studies and maintain excellent grades. As 8:15 a.m. approached and more students began trickling in, Julia suggested they wrap up their impromptu study session, but Lily insisted on continuing for a few more minutes. "Please, Mom, just 10 more minutes," she pleaded. "I want to get good grades again so I can go to Daddy's house like last time." Julia froze, her brow furrowing in confusion. "What do you mean, sweetie? Whose house?" "Daddy's house," Lily repeated matter-of-factly. This time she smiled, and it was the first smile she stretched this morning, Julia realized. "Me and Sophie got to go there last week after we went to the museum. The other kids had to stay in class, but we got to have lunch at Daddy's." Julia's mind raced, trying to make sense of what she was hearing. "Lily, who is Daddy? What are you talking about?" "Mr. Thomas, my teacher," Lily explained. "He's so nice to us, we call him Daddy sometimes. Is that okay?" A knot of unease formed in Julia's stomach. How had she not known about this field trip? And why was her daughter referring to her teacher as Daddy? "Honey, why didn't you tell me about going to the museum?" she asked carefully. Lily sighed dramatically. "Mom, it was written in my agenda book. I told Granny about it and she signed the permission slip. I tried to tell you too, but—" She trailed off, looking down at her hands. "But what, sweetie?" "You're always getting home so late," Lily said quietly. "Usually after I'm already in bed." The words hit Julia like a punch to the gut again. She knew she had been working long hours lately, trying to keep up with the demands of running the family company Daniel had left behind. But had she really become so absent in her daughter's life? As the schoolyard filled with more students and the morning bell rang, Julia made a silent vow to herself. She needed to have a serious conversation with Lily's teacher about appropriate boundaries. And more importantly, she needed to take a hard look at her own priorities and make sure she was truly present for her daughter. As the school bell echoed, Julia glanced at her watch. It was 8:30, signaling the students to head inside. She put the math textbook back into Lily's bag and walked Lily to the entrance. Before she left, she gave her a quick goodbye hug. Julia watched as her daughter walked in and joined a group of friends, her earlier somber mood quickly shifting into animated chatter and laughter. As the last few students hurried inside, Julia found herself hesitating. The revelation about Lily's field trip and her apparently close relationship with her teacher left her feeling unsettled. She knew she should probably head to the office, but the thought of trying to focus on work right now seemed impossible. Just then she spotted the school's principal, Ms. Rebecca Hartman, emerge from the main office. The stern-looking woman was ushering the remaining students inside with brisk efficiency. Julia made a split-second decision and approached her. "Ms. Hartman, do you have a moment?" The principal turned, her brow furrowing slightly as she tried to place Julia's face. "I'm sorry, you look familiar, but—" "Julia Evans," she supplied quickly. "Lily's mother. She's in 5th grade. Recognition dawned in Ms. Hartman's eyes. "Oh, of course. Lily is one of our brightest students. What can I do for you, Mrs. Evans?" Julia hesitated, unsure how to broach the subject. "I was wondering if you could tell me about the museum trip last week. Lily mentioned it this morning, but I'm afraid I missed the notification." Ms. Hartman nodded, her expression neutral. "Ah, yes, it's part of our new enrichment program for high-achieving students. We sent out information in the parent-teacher app and the monthly newsletter." A pang of guilt hit Julia as she realized how out of touch she'd been with Lily's school life. "I see. I've been quite busy with work lately, and I'm afraid I haven't been as diligent about checking updates as I should be." The principal's face softened with understanding. "It's a challenge many working parents face, Mrs. Evans. We understand that balancing career and family responsibilities can be overwhelming at times." Julia nodded gratefully, appreciating the empathy in Ms. Hartman's tone. "Is there something specific about the trip that concerns you?" the principal prompted gently. Julia weighed her words carefully, not wanting to raise alarms without more information. "Not exactly. Lily seemed to have enjoyed it very much. I was just curious about the details." Ms. Hartman smiled, seemingly relieved. "I'm glad to hear that. We believe these experiences are valuable for our students' growth. Is there anything else you'd like to know?" Julia hesitated, debating whether to bring up her concerns about the teacher. But without knowing the full story, she didn't want to potentially cause trouble for someone who might simply be an especially dedicated educator. "No, that was all I needed to confirm," she said at last. "Thank you for your time, Ms. Hartman, and congratulations on Founders' Day." As they parted ways, Julia found herself drawn towards the school building. She told herself it was just curiosity, a desire to see her daughter in her element. But deep down, she knew she was searching for something, answers, reassurance, or perhaps a glimpse of this mysterious Mr. Thomas. The hallways were quiet as Julia made her way to the 2nd floor, where the 5th grade classrooms were located. The scent of chalk dust and floor polish hung in the air, mingling with the faint aroma of children's snacks and new school supplies. Her footsteps echoed softly on the polished linoleum as she approached Lily's room. She slowed as she neared the partially decorated window. Student artwork and colorful posters adorned the glass, creating a cheerful, busy atmosphere. Each piece told a story: crayon drawings of families and pets, carefully constructed dioramas of historical events, vibrant paintings of imaginary landscapes. It was a testament to the creativity and energy of young minds. Peering through a clear spot in the window, Julia's eyes were immediately drawn to the front of the classroom. There, at the chalkboard, stood Lily, and a man Julia assumed must be Mr. Thomas. They were working on a math problem together, Lily stretching on her tiptoes to reach the upper part of the board. Mr. Thomas was of average height, with neatly combed grey hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a crisp button-down shirt and khakis, the very picture of a dedicated educator. But what caught Julia's attention was his hand. It rested on Lily's back, fingers splayed in a way that seemed just a touch too familiar. As Julia watched, the hand slid lower, settling near Lily's waist. A cold feeling settled in Julia's stomach, her maternal instincts flaring to life. But before she could process what she was seeing, Lily turned to look up at Mr. Thomas, her face beaming with a smile of pure adoration. The teacher grinned back, his expression warm and encouraging. Julia felt torn. On one hand, the closeness between teacher and student set off alarm bells in her mind. But Lily looked so happy, so at ease. Was she overreacting? Was this simply a kind, nurturing teacher who had formed a bond with his students? As she stood there, conflicted, Julia realized she couldn't walk away without addressing this, and there's no way she would be able to focus on work if she just left right now. She decided right then and there that she needed to speak with Mr. Thomas, to gauge for herself what kind of man he was. Taking a deep breath, she knocked lightly on the classroom door. Mr. Thomas looked up, surprise flashing across his face, before it softened into a polite smile. He said something to Lily, who nodded and returned to her seat, then turned to the class and announced, "Everyone, please open your textbooks to page 35. I want you to continue working on the exercise while I step out for a moment." The sound of pages rustling as students turned their books filled the air, accompanying Mr. Thomas as he made his way to the door. "Mrs. Evans," he greeted her warmly as he stepped into the hallway, partially closing the door behind him. "What a pleasant surprise. Is everything all right?" Julia forced a smile, trying to keep her voice light and friendly. "Mr. Thomas, I hope I'm not interrupting. I was just wondering if we could have a quick word." The teacher nodded, his manner professional and open. "Of course, what can I help you with?" Julia glanced back at the classroom, where the students were now working quietly at their desks. She could see Lily, her head bent over her work, completely absorbed in the task at hand. "Lily mentioned the museum trip last week," Julia began, her voice low to avoid being overheard. "I'm afraid I missed the notification about it." Mr. Thomas's expression remained pleasant, but Julia thought she detected a flicker of something, tension, in his eyes. It was gone so quickly she couldn't be sure she hadn't imagined it. "Ah, yes," he replied, his tone carefully measured. "It's a new initiative we've started for our top students. Instead of the usual rewards like stickers or sweets, we thought a cultural and educational outing would be far more enriching." Julia nodded, absorbing the information as the principal had mentioned earlier. She simply wanted to ensure she was getting the same consistent explanation from Mr. Thomas, and so far it seemed reasonable enough. Still, something continued to nag at her. Taking a deep breath, she chose her next words carefully before continuing. "And Lily also mentioned going to your house afterward?" She referred to it as Daddy's house. For a moment, Mr. Thomas didn't respond, and Julia saw a flash of something cross his face, but it was gone so quickly again. The air between them seemed to thicken with more tension. "Oh, yes," he said finally, his tone careful. How should I put this? That was rather spontaneous, I'm afraid. I had forgotten to take enough money from the school's petty cash, and after the museum tickets, we didn't have enough left for lunch. My wife had already prepared a cooked meal at home, so I thought, why not bring the students home? I've already reported this to Principal Hartman, of course." The explanation sounded plausible, and Julia felt some of her tension ease, but there was still the matter of the Daddy nickname. She took another deep breath before continuing, her voice soft but firm. "I appreciate your kindness, Mr. Thomas. Truly, it's a blessing to know Lily has such a caring teacher. However, I'm a bit concerned about this daddy business. You see, Lily lost her father 5 years ago. She's still coping with that loss, still in therapy, though less frequently now. I worry about her getting confused with the wrong image or forming attachments." Mr. Thomas's face softened with what appeared to be genuine sympathy. He leaned in slightly, his voice lowering to match Julia's tone. "I completely understand your concern, Mrs. Evans. The daddy thing actually started during a storytelling class. One of the students said I sounded like his father reading bedtime stories, and it just caught on. I've told them to keep it to class time only, but you know how children are." He paused, his expression turning serious. "I assure you, I'll speak to the class about this. We'll put a stop to it immediately." Julia felt a wave of relief wash over her. Mr. Thomas seemed to understand her concerns and was willing to address them. Maybe she had been overreacting after all. "Thank you," she said, feeling slightly embarrassed now. "I'm sorry for taking up your time like this. I should have waited until after school, but—" Mr. Thomas waved off her apology, his smile warm and reassuring. "Not at all, Mrs. Evans, I completely understand. As a parent myself, I'd want to address any concerns immediately too." As Julia said goodbye and turned to leave, she felt much of her earlier unease dissipate. Mr. Thomas seemed kind, professional, and understanding. Lily was lucky to have such a teacher, she thought. But as she made her way back through the now bustling hallways, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that something still didn't feel quite right. Julia pushed the thought away, chalking it up to her own guilt over not being as involved in Lily's school life as she should be. She made her way out of the school building, the morning sun now higher in the sky, warming her face as she stepped outside. The schoolyard was empty now, the last stragglers having made their way to class. Julia took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp autumn air, and tried to shake off the lingering sense of disquiet. As she walked back to her car, Julia made a mental note to check the parent-teacher app more regularly. She also resolved to have a more in-depth conversation with Lily about Mr. Thomas and the Daddy nickname. Communication was key, she reminded herself. With open dialogue and vigilance, she could ensure Lily's safety and well-being. Julia got into her car and started the engine. She pulled out of the school parking lot. The building receded in her rearview mirror. As Julia drove away, her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The conversation with Mr. Thomas had alleviated some of her immediate concerns, but a nagging sense of unease still lingered in the back of her mind. She found herself replaying every detail of their interaction, searching for something she might have missed. The familiar route to her office seemed longer than usual, as Julia's thoughts drifted back to Lily. She pictured her daughter's bright smile as she worked on math problems with Mr. Thomas, the easy rapport between them. It was good that Lily had a positive male role model in her life, wasn't it? After losing her father at such a young age, perhaps this connection with her teacher was helping her heal. But then Julia remembered the way Mr. Thomas's hand had rested on Lily's back, sliding down to her waist. Was she overreacting to an innocent gesture of support, or was her maternal instinct picking up on something her conscious mind wanted to dismiss? The city streets gave way to tree-lined avenues as Julia approached her office building. The autumn leaves were just beginning to turn, splashes of gold and crimson among the green. It was a beautiful day, the kind of crisp, clear morning that usually lifted her spirits. Today, however, she barely noticed the scenery, her mind too preoccupied with worry. As she pulled into the parking garage, Julia made a sudden decision. She couldn't focus on work with all these thoughts swirling in her head. What she needed was some time to clear her mind and gain perspective. Checking her phone, she saw no urgent messages from the office. It was unusually quiet today, a rare occurrence in her typically hectic schedule. Taking advantage of the lull, Julia turned her car around and headed home instead. The drive was short, their house located in an upscale neighborhood not far from the school and the office. As she pulled into the driveway, Julia admired the modern, minimalist exterior of their home. It was a beautiful house she had built together with her husband 12 years ago, one that held both joyful memories and painful reminders of the life they'd once shared as a complete family. With a deep breath, she stepped out of the car, the crisp air filling her lungs as she made her way to the front door. Entering through the front door, Julia was greeted by the familiar scent of lavender and vanilla, her mother-in-law's favorite aromatherapy blend. The house was quiet, save for the soft ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the hallway, a wedding gift from her late husband's parents. She found Evelyn Evans in the living room, sipping tea and enjoying a light breakfast after her morning yoga session. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, casting a warm glow on the room's neutral tones and highlighting the silver in Evelyn's elegantly styled hair. "Julia, dear," Evelyn exclaimed, surprise evident in her voice. She set down her teacup, the delicate china clinking softly against its saucer. "I didn't expect to see you home so early. Is everything all right?" Julia managed a small smile as she joined Evelyn at the dining table. The polished wood surface reflected the morning light, and Julia could see her own worried expression mirrored in its shine. "Everything's fine, just a lot on my mind. I needed some time to think, Mom." Evelyn's brow furrowed with concern, the fine lines around her eyes deepening. "Can I get you something to eat?" "Some muesli and yogurt, perhaps." Julia shook her head, her stomach too knotted with worry to consider food. "No, thank you, I'm not very hungry." She paused, then decided to broach the subject that had been weighing on her. "Mom, did you know about Lily's museum trip last week?" The older woman nodded, reaching for her teacup. "Yes, it was written in her agenda. I thought you knew about it." Julia sighed, feeling yet another wave of guilt wash over her, probably the 100th time since morning. She ran a hand through her hair, a nervous habit she thought she'd long outgrown. "I only found out this morning. I've been so wrapped up in work lately. I feel like I'm missing so much of Lily's life." Evelyn reached across the table, patting Julia's hand comfortingly. Her touch was warm and reassuring, a gesture that spoke of years of shared experiences and mutual understanding. "You're doing the best you can, dear. Balancing work and single motherhood isn't easy." Julia nodded, grateful for her mother-in-law's understanding. She hesitated for a moment before asking her next question, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Has Lily ever mentioned anything to you about going to Daddy's house?" Evelyn's eyebrows shot up in surprise, her hand freezing midway to her teacup. "Daddy's house? No, I've never heard her say anything like that. What's this about, Julia?" Julia recounted her conversation with Mr. Thomas, explaining about the museum trip and the subsequent visit to his home. As she spoke, she could see Evelyn's expression growing increasingly troubled, the older woman's forehead creasing with concern. "And the students call him Daddy sometimes," Julia finished, her voice trembling slightly. "Mr. Thomas said it started during a storytelling class and just caught on. He promised to put a stop to it, but I don't know. Something about it all just feels off to me." Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, her tea forgotten as she processed this information. The ticking of the grandfather clock seemed to grow louder in the silence, each second punctuated by the heavy pendulum's swing. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and serious. "Julia, I don't want to alarm you, but this doesn't sound right to me at all. A teacher taking students to his private home without parental knowledge or consent, even with the principal knowledge, and this daddy business, it's highly inappropriate, regardless of how it started." Julia felt a chill run down her spine at Evelyn's words. Hearing her concerns validated by someone else made them suddenly feel much more real and urgent. She wrapped her arms around herself, as if warding off a physical chill. "But Lily seems so happy," Julia said weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You should have seen her in class with Mr. Thomas. She was smiling, engaged. I haven't seen her that animated in a long time." Evelyn's expression softened with sympathy. She reached out, clasping both of Julia's hands in her own. Her grip was firm and warm, an anchor in the storm of Julia's emotions. "I know you want Lily to be happy, dear, we all do. But sometimes what makes a child happy in the moment isn't what's best for them in the long run. And sometimes people who mean to do harm are very good at making children feel special and cared for." Julia felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. She blinked rapidly, trying to hold them back. "What should I do, Evelyn? Am I overreacting? Should I talk to Lily about this?" Evelyn squeezed Julia's hands gently, her voice calm but resolute. "You're not overreacting. Your instincts are telling you something isn't right, and you should listen to them. I think we need to have a very careful, gentle conversation with Lily when she gets home. We need to find out exactly what happened at Mr. Thomas's house and how she feels about him." Julia nodded, feeling simultaneously relieved to have a plan of action and terrified of what they might uncover. "You're right. We'll talk to her together. Thank you, Evelyn. I don't know what I'd do without you." As they sat there, hands clasped across the table, Julia felt a mix of emotions washing over her. Fear for her daughter's safety, anger at herself for not being more vigilant, and a steely determination to get to the bottom of this situation. Whatever was going on with Mr. Thomas and Lily, she would uncover the truth and protect her child, no matter what it took. Julia and Evelyn remained at the table, discussing their approach to talking with Lily and considering their next steps. The world outside continued its usual rhythm, oblivious to the storm brewing within the Evans household. As the grandfather clock chimed the hour, Julia steeled herself for the challenges that lay ahead, knowing that the safety and well-being of her daughter hung in the balance. The morning light shifted, casting long shadows across the dining room. Julia and Evelyn remained at the table, discussing their approach to talking with Lily and considering their next steps. The world outside continued its usual rhythm, oblivious to the storm brewing within the Evans household. As the grandfather clock chimed the hour, Julia steeled herself for the challenges that lay ahead, knowing that the safety and well-being of her daughter hung in the balance. Evelyn busied herself around the house, her presence a comforting constant in Julia's peripheral vision. The older woman moved with purpose, tidying already immaculate surfaces and rearranging flowers in crystal vases, small familiar rituals that seemed to ground her in times of stress. Sunlight shifted across the hardwood floors as the morning wore on, the shadows lengthening and changing shape. Julia found herself watching the play of light, her thoughts a tangled web of concern and self-recrimination. How had she let herself become so disconnected from Lily's daily life? Had her focus on work, on maintaining the life they'd built, blinded her to potential dangers? As the clock inched closer to noon, Julia's anxiety steadily grew. She knew Lily's half-day would be ending soon, and the looming conversation weighed heavily on her mind. How could she approach such a delicate subject with her young daughter? No matter how much she thought it over, she felt she would never truly be ready. Julia closed her laptop with a soft click, the sound seeming to echo in the quiet room. She stood, smoothing down her skirt in a nervous gesture. "I think I should pick Lily up myself today," she announced, her voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. Evelyn looked up from the book she'd been reading, her expression understanding. The afternoon light caught the silver in her hair, giving her an almost ethereal appearance. "That's probably a good idea, dear. It'll give you a chance to gauge her mood before we talk to her." Julia nodded, grateful once again for her mother-in-law's steady presence. She gathered her keys and bag, then paused at the door, her hand resting on the cool metal of the doorknob. "Evelyn, thank you for everything." The older woman smiled warmly, the corners of her eyes crinkling. "That's what family is for, Julia. Now go on. You don't want to be late." The drive to Silverwood Academy was short, but to Julia it felt interminable. The familiar streets seemed to stretch endlessly before her, each traffic light an eternity of red. Her mind raced with possible scenarios, rehearsing what she might say to Lily. The car's interior felt stifling despite the cool air flowing from the vents. As she pulled into the school parking lot, Julia was surprised to find it nearly empty. A few cars were scattered across the asphalt expanse, but nothing like the usual bustle of afternoon pickup. Checking her watch, she realized she was right on time. Where was everyone? Julia exited her car, the slam of the door echoing across the quiet lot. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. She made her way to the pickup area, her heels clicking on the pavement, the sound seeming unnaturally loud in the stillness. Lily wasn't at her usual waiting spot. In fact, there were hardly any children around at all. A few straggling parents collected their kids and left, their voices hushed as if reluctant to disturb the unusual quiet. Julia stood alone, her anxiety mounting with each passing minute. After waiting for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes, Julia decided to go inside the school. The hallways were eerily quiet, most of the classrooms already locked up for the day. The scent of floor polish and chalk dust hung in the air, mingling with the faint aroma of school lunches, long since eaten. She made her way to Lily's classroom, her heart pounding in her chest. The door was closed, the room dark behind the decorated windows. Julia cupped her hands around her eyes, peering through the glass, but saw only empty desks and silent chairs. Panic began to set in as Julia searched the nearby rooms and corridors, calling out Lily's name. Her voice echoed off the lockers, seeming to mock her growing fear. Where could she be? Had something happened? The worst-case scenarios she'd been trying to suppress all morning now came flooding to the forefront of her mind. With no sign of Lily anywhere, Julia made her way to Principal Hartman's office, her steps quick and purposeful. The click of her heels on the linoleum seemed to match the rapid beating of her heart. She knocked on the door, perhaps a bit more forcefully than she'd intended, the sound sharp in the quiet hallway. "Come in," came the principal's voice from inside, muffled by the heavy wood of the door. Julia entered, her worry evident on her face. Principal Hartman looked up from her desk, recognition dawning in her eyes. The afternoon sun slanted through the Venetian blinds, casting alternating bands of light and shadow across the room. "Mrs. Evans, isn't it? We met this morning. What can I do for you?" The principal's voice was calm and professional, but there was a note of concern in her tone as she took in Julia's distressed appearance. "I can't find my daughter," Julia blurted out, her voice tight with fear. "Lily Evans, 5th grade. She's not in the pickup area or her classroom. Do you know where she might be?" Principal Hartman's brow furrowed in concern. She stood smoothing down her blazer, in a gesture reminiscent of Julia's own nervous habits. "That's odd. All the students should have been dismissed by now. Let me check with the office staff." As the principal reached for her phone, a thought struck Julia, cold and sharp as an icicle. What about Mr. Thomas? Could Lily be with him? A flicker of something, confusion, concern, passed over Principal Hartman's face. She paused, her hand hovering over the phone. Mr. Thomas should have left by now as well. Today was a half-day for teachers too, due to the Founders' Day celebrations. Julia felt her heart sink, a leaden weight settling in her stomach. If Mr. Thomas had already left, and Lily wasn't here. Her mind raced with terrible possibilities, each more horrifying than the last. Principal Hartman, seeming to sense Julia's mounting distress, stood up from her desk. Her voice was calm but carried an undercurrent of urgency. "Let's go to the administration office. We can check the staff sign-out logs and see if we can get any information." They hurried down the hallway to the admin office, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. The smell of coffee and photocopier toner grew stronger as they approached, the mundane sense a stark contrast to the fear gripping Julia's heart. A middle-aged woman sat behind a computer, her fingers flying over the keyboard as they entered. Principal Hartman quickly explained the situation, and the woman, whose nameplate identified her as Mrs. Cooper, began typing rapidly, her brow furrowed in concentration. "According to our records," Mrs. Cooper said after a moment, her voice carrying a note of concern, "Mr. Thomas Grayson clocked out about 30 minutes before the end of the school day." Julia felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her. Mr. Thomas had left early, and now Lily was nowhere to be found. This couldn't be a coincidence. The room seemed to spin around her, the fluorescent lights suddenly too bright, too harsh. As Julia struggled to process this information, another teacher entered the office. He was a tall man with graying hair and kind eyes, and he looked concerned as he took in the tense atmosphere. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his gaze moving from Julia to Principal Hartman. The principal quickly explained the situation: Lily's disappearance, Mr. Thomas's early departure. As she spoke, the new teacher's expression grew increasingly troubled, his forehead creasing with worry. I think I might know something about this," he said hesitantly. All eyes in the room turned to him expectantly, the air thick with tension. "Mr. Thomas asked me to cover the last half hour of his class today. He said he needed to take Lily to the infirmary because she was having some kind of stomach issue. GERD, I think he called it." Julia felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. GERD? Lily's never had problems with acid reflux before. She stood stiffly in the small, overly bright office, the hum of the fluorescent lights blending with the rapid beat of her heart. "Principal Hartman, I need you to call Mr. Thomas," Julia said firmly, her voice tight with unease. "Please." Principal Hartman gave her a small nod and picked up the phone, dialing Mr. Thomas's number with practiced ease. The line rang once, twice, 5 times, no answer. Julia's anxiety spiked, a cold wave creeping up her spine. She swallowed hard, remembering the conversation she'd had with Mr. Thomas this morning. He mentioned his wife. Clinging to that detail, she blurted out, "Try his wife's number." "He told me he has a wife." Principal Hartman paused. The receiver was midway in the air, her brows knitting together in confusion. She pulled the phone away and set it down. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Evans, but to my knowledge, Mr. Thomas isn't married. He doesn't have a wife or any family listed in our records." The words hit Julia like a punch to the chest, stealing the breath from her lungs. "What?" she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. No, he said he has a wife and kid." Beside her, the HR representative gave a somber nod, confirming the principal's statement. "It's true, there's no family on file." Julia's world tilted, her vision blurred at the edges as the reality crashed down on her. He lied. Mr. Thomas had lied so effortlessly in her face, with a warmth and sincerity that had disarmed her completely. The room spun and she felt her body sway, on the brink of collapsing under the weight of her realization. "Mrs. Evans!" Principal Hartman rushed to her side, steadying her as she nearly slipped. Mr. Courtney quickly fetched a glass of water, pressing it into Julia's trembling hands. The coolness of the glass grounded her just enough to keep her conscious, but her mind was racing, screaming at her to act. As soon as her breathing steadied, the pieces were starting to fall into place, and the picture they formed was terrifying. He must have taken Lily out of school without proper authorization, and now both of them were gone. Julia's eyes snapped to Principal Hartman. "We need to call the police," Julia said, her voice shaking but determined. 911, right now." Principal Hartman nodded gravely, reaching for the phone on Mrs. Cooper's desk. As she dialed, Julia felt a strange mix of fear and resolve settle over her. Whatever was happening, whatever Mr. Thomas had done, she would find Lily. She had to. As the principal spoke to the emergency dispatcher, providing details and Mr. Thomas's home address that Mrs. Cooper produced, Julia's mind raced. She knew where that address was. She'd lived in this town long enough to navigate its streets blindfolded. It wasn't far from here. Without a word to anyone, she turned and ran out of the office, ignoring the calls behind her. She had to get to Lily. Every second counted now. Throwing open the school's front doors, Julia sprinted to her car, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the keys. Slamming the car into gear, Julia floored the accelerator, the tires screeching as she tore out of the parking lot. The town blurred past her, but all she could see was Lily's face, her smile, her laughter, and the horrifying possibility that she might have made the gravest mistake of her life. Julia's car screeched to a halt in front of the modest two-story house, just as two police cruisers pulled up beside her, their lights flashing but sirens silent. She flung open her door and rushed toward the officers before they'd even stepped out. "Mrs. Evans?" she called out, her voice authoritative but kind. Julia nodded, trying to catch her breath. "Yes, that's me. My daughter Lily, she might be inside. He lied about everything, please. You have to get in there." The officers exchanged a tense glance, then nodded, their training snapping into action. "Stay back, ma'am. We need you to remain outside," one of them instructed firmly, his hand raised to keep her from following. "We're going to approach the house and assess the situation. I promise we'll keep you updated." Julia's heart pounded in her chest as the officers approached the front door, weapons holstered but at the ready. One of them, a tall man with sharp eyes, knocked against the wood. "Mr. Thomas, this is the police," his voice boomed through the quiet neighborhood. "Open the door immediately." Silence, and the officers exchanged glances, then knocked again, louder this time. "Mr. Thomas, open the door now. We have a warrant to enter the premises." Still nothing. The house remained eerily silent, the curtains drawn tightly shut, giving no hint of what was inside. Julia's breath hitched. "Please, Lily, be okay." The officer knocked again, louder this time, his hand hovering near his holster. "This is your final warning. Open the door, or we will enter by force." Julia's heart raced as she saw the officers confer briefly, then nod to each other. In a swift, coordinated movement, they positioned themselves on either side of the door. One of them counted down silently. 3, 2, 1. then kicked the door open with a resounding crash. The officers surged in, weapons drawn, their voices sharp commands cutting through the heavy air. "Police, anyone inside, identify yourself!" Julia stood frozen at the edge of the driveway, her hands trembling at her sides, watching with wide, terrified eyes. Every fibre of her being screamed to rush inside, but she forced herself to stay put, knowing she'd only be in the way. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as the officers moved through the first floor. Julia could hear the muffled sound of boots against hardwood, doors creaking open, and the occasional sharp call of "clear" echoing from within. Then one of the officers appeared at the door, his expression grim but calm. "The first floor's empty," he said, glancing back over his shoulder. "But it's definitely his house. There are photos of him on the walls." A cold chill swept over Julia at those words. If he's not here, where is he, and where's Lily? But before she could voice her fears, another officer called out from deeper inside the house, his voice tense and urgent. "Hey, you need to see this." The first officer disappeared back into the house, leaving Julia standing on the front lawn, her heart in her throat. Moments later, he reappeared, his face now a shade paler. "Ma'am," he said carefully, stepping outside to meet her, "we found something upstairs. You need to stay here, but—" Julia didn't wait to hear the rest. She darted past him before he could stop her, her fear overriding any sense of caution. She barreled through the doorway, her eyes scanning the eerily pristine living room. The walls were lined with photos, school portraits of Mr. Thomas with various students, smiling, candid shots from classroom activities, and there, mixed in among them, Lily's face. There was no sign of a wife or family, confirming what Julia had learned earlier. Julia's stomach dropped. Ignoring the officer's shouts behind her, she sprinted up the stairs, taking them two at a time, her breath sharp and uneven. At the top, she came to an abrupt stop, her heart pounding in her chest as her eyes widened in horror. Voices and laughter drifted from one of the rooms, mingling with what sounded like music playing from a speaker. "Oh my God," Julia whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. Just then the officer caught up with her, gently but firmly pulling her back. "Ma'am, we need you to wait outside. We're calling in backup now. We'll find her." Julia shook her head hard. Tears streaming down her face. "Number Lily need to see me. She would be afraid." She sobbed, her voice breaking. "Please." The officer paused briefly before giving a sharp nod, signaling Julia to keep quiet. "Promise you'll stay close behind us," she instructed firmly, "and follow our directions exactly." Julia followed the officers as they approached the room. The sound became clearer. The lead officer held up a hand, signaling everyone to stop. He approached the door cautiously, listened for a moment, then nodded to his colleagues. In one swift motion, he threw the door open, her heart in her throat. "Police, don't move!" Julia moved next to one of the officers, her eyes wild with fear and hope. What she saw made her stumble to a stop, her mind struggling to process the scene before her. There, sitting on a couch in what appeared to be a home office, were Lily and Mr. Thomas. They were watching something like a music video on a large TV mounted on the wall, both of them laughing at whatever was playing. Lily was curled up next to Mr. Thomas, her head resting against his arm in a way that made Julia's skin crawl. For a moment, everyone in the room froze. Lily looked up, her eyes wide with confusion as she took in the police officers and her mother. Mr. Thomas's face drained of colour, his arm instinctively tightening around Lily. "Mom?" Lily's voice was small, uncertain. "What's going on?" Julia rushed forward, her arms outstretched. "Lily, oh, thank God you're okay. Come here, sweetheart." But Lily didn't move. She looked from her mother to Mr. Thomas, clearly bewildered by the situation. "Mr. Thomas, why are the police here?" The teacher's face had hardened into a mask of calm, but Julia could see the panic in his eyes. "It's okay, Lily," he said softly. "I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding. Why don't you go with your mom while I talk to the officers?" As Lily hesitantly stood up, the police moved in. Two officers gently but firmly escorted Lily to Julia, while the others surrounded Mr. Thomas. "Thomas Grayson, you're under arrest for the suspected kidnapping of a minor," the lead officer announced, his voice stern. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As the officer continued reading Mr. Thomas his rights, Julia pulled Lily into a tight hug, tears streaming down her face. Are you okay, baby? Did he do anything strange to you? Lily looked up at her mother, confusion and fear evident in her eyes. I'm fine, Mum. We were just watching a movie. Why is Mr. Thomas being arrested? He didn't do anything wrong. Julia's heart broke at the innocence in her daughter's voice. How could she explain the gravity of the situation to a child who clearly had no idea of the danger she'd been in? Mr. Thomas, still restrained by the police, tried to plead his case. Mrs. Evans, please. This is all a big misunderstanding. I was just trying to help Lily. She wasn't feeling well and I... Julia cut him off, her voice sharp with anger and fear. You should have informed the principal or called me, not taken a student to your private residence. Mr. Thomas's face fell. I'm sorry, I truly was just trying to take care of her. I didn't mean any harm. However, his calm demeanor quickly shifted when an officer walked towards his office desk. Mr. Thomas's eyes darted to his open laptop on the table, and he suddenly looked incredibly anxious. He seemed to be considering making a run for it despite being restrained. An officer noticed the direction of his gaze. Let's see what you're hiding, he said, moving towards the laptop. Mr. Thomas fought against his restraint so hard that he fell to the floor, desperately trying to reach the computer. The officer picked up the laptop, and as he looked at the screen, his expression changed to one of shock and disgust. Julia approached, making sure to keep Lily behind her, shielded from the screen. When she saw the contents, she gasped, tears springing to her eyes. The laptop contained recordings of the classroom, pictures from school trips, and numerous close-up photographs of female students, with Lily's images dominating the collection. The wallpaper itself was a picture of Lily, smiling innocently at the camera. You monster! Julia shouted, and an officer came to restrain her. The detective turned to Mr. Thomas, and the other officers put handcuff on his hand. Thomas Grayson, with this evidence, we'll make sure you'll be locked away for a long time. Better hope you ever see sunlight again with all this evidence. As the police began to lead Mr. Thomas out of the room in handcuffs, he locked eyes with Julia and Emily. For a moment, she saw something dark and cold in his gaze, something that sent a chill down her spine. Julia turned away, focusing all her attention on Lily. She knelt down, looking her daughter in the eyes while wiping her own teary eyes. The room buzzed with activity as police officers moved in and out, collecting evidence and discussing the case in low, urgent tones. Lily looked up at her mother, confusion and fear evident in her eyes. Mum, I don't understand. Why are you crying? And why is Mr. Thomas in trouble? He didn't do anything wrong. We just watched a movie because my stomach hurt. Julia felt her heart clench at her daughter's innocence. She knelt down to Lily's level, struggling to find the right words to explain the situation without causing more trauma. Lily, sweetheart, she began carefully. Sometimes adults do things that seem okay but aren't. Mr. Thomas shouldn't have taken you to his house without telling me or the school. That's why the police need to talk to him. Lily's brow furrowed. But he said the nurse wasn't there and he wanted to help me feel better. He gave me some candy that made my tummy feel funny, but then he made tea and I felt better. Julia froze, her blood running cold at Lily's words. She exchanged a quick glance with a nearby officer who had clearly overheard. Lily, honey, Julia said, fighting to keep her voice calm, what kind of candy did Mr. Thomas give you? Lily shrugged. I don't know, it was sour, but it tasted good. He said it was a special reward for doing well on the math quiz. Julia stood up slowly, her mind reeling. She turned to the officer, her voice barely above a whisper. We need to have her checked out, now. The officer nodded grimly. I'll call for paramedics, they can examine her here. As the officer made the call, Julia hugged Lily close, her mind racing with terrible possibilities. What had Mr. Thomas given her daughter? What were his true intentions? A few minutes later, an ambulance arrived. The paramedics examined Lily in the back of their van, asking her questions and checking her vital signs. After a thorough examination, they approached Julia. "Mrs. Evans," one of the paramedics said, "Lily seems to be okay. The stomach pain she experienced was likely just a reaction to the sour candy. There's no sign of any other substances in her system. However, if you notice any unusual symptoms, please bring her to the hospital immediately." Julia nodded, relief washing over her. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. As the paramedics packed up their equipment, Julia turned back to Lily. "Sweetheart, I need to tell you something important. Mr. Thomas, he lied to you. The school nurse wasn't absent today. He made that up so he could take you to his house." Lily's eyes widened in shock. "But why would he lie? He's always so nice." Julia sighed, her heart breaking for her daughter's lost innocence. "Sometimes people who seem nice can do bad things. Mr. Thomas broke a lot of rules by taking you to his house. He put you in danger, even if you didn't realize it." Tears welled up in Lily's eyes. "I don't understand, Mom. I thought he was my friend. He was the closest I have to Dad." Julia felt her heart break at Lily's confession. She wrapped her daughter in a firm, protective hug. "I know, sweetheart. I know it's confusing and frightening. Mr. Thomas is a tricky person. You see, a good adult would never ask you to keep secrets from your parents or take you out of school without permission. I promise, we'll get through this together. You're safe now, and that's the most important thing." As they stood there holding each other, Julia saw more police cars arriving from the window, along with a vehicle she recognized as belonging to Child Protective Services. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. "Lily," she said softly, "some people are going to want to talk to us about what happened. They're here to help. I'll be with you the whole time, okay?" Lily nodded, wiping her eyes. "Okay, Mom. I'm scared, but I'm glad you're here." Julia kissed the top of Lily's head. "I'll always be here for you, sweetheart, always." As they walked out of the room towards the waiting officials downstairs, Julia knew that their ordeal was far from over. There would be questions to answer, statements to give, and a long road of healing ahead. Julia and Lily stood on the front lawn of Mr. Thomas's house. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured grass. The neighborhood, usually quiet at this hour, was alive with activity. Police officers moved in and out of the house, their radios crackling with updates and instructions. A familiar car pulled up to the curb. Julia felt a wave of relief wash over her as she saw Evelyn step out, followed closely by Principal Hartman. "Julia! Lily!" Evelyn called out, hurrying towards them. Her face was etched with worry, but her eyes shone with relief at seeing them safe. Lily, who had been unusually quiet, perked up at the sight of her grandmother. "Granny!" she exclaimed, running into Evelyn's open arms. As Evelyn embraced Lily tightly, Principal Hartman approached Julia. Her face was drawn with concern and what looked like guilt. "Mrs. Evans," she began, her voice low and filled with remorse, "I want to apologize for this incident. We clearly overlooked Mr. Thomas taking a student out of school. We need to update our clock-in and clock-out system for better security." Julia inhaled deeply before speaking. "I won't pursue legal action against the school. I understand Mr. Thomas acted on his own agenda. However, I expect every staff member to be thoroughly briefed and retrained. I want a complete review of all staff backgrounds and documentation, and a public statement with an apology issued to all parents regarding this incident. You see, Principal, there's evidence that Mr. Thomas kept photos of other female students, not just Lily. Their parents have a right to know." The principal nodded solemnly, fully aware of the potential damage to the school's reputation. "Of course, Mrs. Evans, we take full responsibility for this incident. I commit to implementing all these actions immediately." At that moment, the detective, the same one who had found the laptop earlier, approached the group. "Principal Hartman, we'll need all paperwork and records regarding Mr. Thomas Grayson. We'll also be taking CCTV footage and conducting an investigation at the school in the coming days. We'll need the cooperation of all staff to give statements when needed." The detective then turned to Julia, Evelyn, and Lily. "We'll need statements from all of you at the station. However, if you wish, Lily can rest at home with her grandmother for now." Julia nodded. "I'll come to the station. Lily can go home with her grandmother." Before the police could leave, Lily spoke up, her voice small and uncertain. "Can I see Mr. Thomas again? Will he be punished very hard? He was always so kind to me." The officer knelt down to Lily's level, his voice gentle but firm. "Lily, even though Mr. Thomas acted very kind to you, we found that he did something very bad on his computer. It wasn't safe or right, and that's why we have to make sure he doesn't do it again. It's our job to protect you and your friends, even if it feels hard to understand right now." He gave her a reassuring smile. "You didn't do anything wrong, Lily. But sometimes adults make choices that aren't okay, and we have to step in to fix it. It's normal to feel upset or confused, but you're safe now and your mum is here to help you through this. That's what's most important." Lily nodded, still visibly struggling to understand why they had to take Mr. Thomas away. Julia knelt down to Lily's level, looking her daughter in the eyes. "Sweetheart, I need to go with the police for a little while to answer some questions. Granny and Principal Hartman will take you home, okay? I'll be back as soon as I can." "Okay, I can stay with Granny," Lily replied. Julia hugged Lily tightly once more before standing up. She turned to Evelyn and Principal Hartman. "Please, keep a close eye on her. If she says anything about what happened today, let the officers know immediately." As the police prepared to leave, Principal Hartman opened her car's door for Lily and Evelyn home personally. They got into the principal's car, while Julia prepared to follow the police to the station. Julia watched as the principal's car drove away with Lily and Evelyn. As she got into her own car to follow the police, she felt tears welling up in her eyes. The events of the day replayed in her mind, and she found herself reflecting on how she could be a better mother, paying closer attention to Lily's school life and the people she was close to. With a heavy heart but a determined spirit, Julia started her car and began the drive to the police station. The events of the day replayed in her mind like a relentless, haunting film. The setting sun cast long shadows across the road, mirroring the dark thoughts that clouded her mind. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white with tension. The guilt weighed heavily on her chest, making it hard to breathe. As a single mother, she had always prided herself on being both mother and father to Lily, on being enough. But today had shaken that confidence to its core. She reflected on all the late nights spent at the office, the school events she'd missed, and the times she'd been too exhausted to truly listen to Lily's stories about her day. Had she become so consumed with preserving her late husband's legacy and managing his business that she'd overlooked the most important part of what he left behind, their daughter? The familiar streets of their town passed by unnoticed as Julia's mind raced. She'd trusted the school, trusted Mr. Thomas to keep Lily safe. But that trust had been misplaced, and Lily had nearly paid the price for it. The thought of what could have happened if she hadn't followed her instincts made her stomach churn. As she approached the station, Julia took a deep, shaky breath. She made a silent vow to herself and to Lily. Things would change. She would scale back at work, delegate more responsibilities. She'd be more involved in Lily's school life, get to know her teachers, her friends. No more assuming everything was fine just because Lily seemed happy on the surface. This ordeal had been a harsh wake-up call, but she was determined to learn from it. She couldn't change what had happened, but she could ensure that moving forward, Lily would never doubt for a moment that her mother was fully present and engaged in her life.